Yes. Okay.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome everybody this morning. My name's Carol Mosier, and I'm a member of Westminster's Middle East Task Force. On behalf of Westminster, we'd like to thank you for your presence here today at the church or on Zoom. Our Middle East Task Force focuses on the areas of Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine. Over the past few years, we've never been short on discussion topics or projects to address the dire humanitarian needs of those in the area. Today, we're pleased to welcome Mara Kronenfeld. Mara is the Executive Director of UNRWA-USA. UNRWA, which stands for United Nations Relief and Works Agency, was established by the UN in 1949 to provide assistance and protection for registered Palestine refugees. UNRWA-USA works to lift up the voices, experiences, and humanity of Palestine refugees and to secure American support for resources essential to every human being for the promise of a better life. Mara's focused most of her career on international development with over 15 years of designing, implementing, and leading youth development programs in the Middle East and North Africa. Mara holds a master's degree in Near Eastern Studies from New York University and a bachelor's degree in anthropology from Stanford University. Westminster has supported and continues to support UNRWA-USA's humanitarian relief programs, including education, health services, social services, emergency response, and food assistance. In 2021, we partnered with UNRWA-USA to fund a solar-powered water desalination unit at an UNRWA boys' school in Khan Yunis in Gaza. We were excited to be able to provide clean water to over 2,400 students and staff at the school. Since October 7th, the resolve of our task force has only grown stronger in support of Palestine and our Palestinian brothers and sisters in Gaza, the West Bank, and wherever Palestine refugees have settled. Mara, we look forward to hearing your insight and your thoughts. We welcome you to Westminster. I did something to the screen, but I think we're okay.
I can tell this is going to be tough this morning for me because I'm already emotional being here. and as my former colleague Lori Mosier, who's in the room, knows, I'm an easy cry. So I got to keep it together. And I'm emotional because I've just heard so much about this church and the work of Carol and Mark and all of you, because I've had the honor of working closely with Lori, and it is such a pleasure to be here, and also with Mike, of course, as part of Delpher. So it is really an honor to be here and speak with you. I really want to thank Carol and Mark for inviting me today. So I'm going to speak for a little while, some observations and some description of what's going on, and also the attacks against UNRWA, maybe about 15-20 minutes. And then I really want to open up the floor for questions and try to answer. Obviously, the media doesn't get the whole story. I don't have to tell all of you. And so happy to share what I know about what's happening on the ground in UNRWA's work. And hello to all those in the Zoom world. Welcome. So all of you here in this room today understand the critical need for life-saving humanitarian support in Gaza. And we're all sitting here a couple of days after, I don't know if you saw, Representatives Carson, Jayapal, and Schakowsky introduced the UNRWA Funding Restoration Act in Congress. This was last Thursday. And this was a really important moment where these three representatives came together to introduce this bill with 65 co-signers, and then UNRWA-USA was able to get 104 organizations to sign on in support. And I'll just tell you from my perspective, we could talk more about this later, it's a moment when everybody in our staff and staff of UNRWA and even the United Nations and those working to support Palestine generally receive all kinds of terrible hate mail, have been called all sorts of terrible names. Myself have been called terrorist, Hamas, Jew hater, etc. And to be able to be on Capitol Hill, sitting in that place where I've seen 100, maybe thousands of press conferences on the news over my many years, to be there in front of the Capitol and to speak our truth, my truth, our organization's truth, and have these senators and Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar there with us was so powerful to me. It really made me feel like we're not on the periphery. We're still on the periphery, but not as much on the periphery. And I know that some of you got to tune into some of that, and it was just a really profound moment for me personally. As sometimes we feel like there aren't enough people listening and paying attention, and this just felt like we've got people on Capitol Hill in Congress who are paying attention, who know what is right. That was really, really profound. And as I asked my brother who works for the State Department, I said, am I part of the squad now? Because Ilhan was there, Rashida was there. He said, you're squad adjacent. So that's good enough for me. So we all know how deeply important it is for not just these representatives and those 65 members of Congress who signed on to understand the critical need for life-saving humanitarian support in Gaza, but we need all of our government to understand this. We need the Biden administration to understand, and we need obviously this UNRWA Funding Restoration Act to be passed. Palestine refugees in Gaza need unhindered access to a level of humanitarian assistance unprecedented in modern history, and at the same time, a time in which humanitarian aid is being attacked like no other time in history. I'm Mark Kronenfeld, Executive Director of UNRWA-USA, and providing critical humanitarian assistance to Palestinian refugees has been the mission of UNRWA for over 75 years, and that of UNRWA-USA since its founding in 2005. You all might have heard about UNRWA in the news recently, both, of course, for the humanitarian aid and the key role it's played with Palestinian refugees over the last 75 years. Also, of course, Israel has accused UNRWA and has made numerous unfounded accusations against the agency. One accusation is that 19 members of UNRWA's 30,000 employees may or may not have taken part in horrific events of October 7th in Israel. In the case of 9 of these employees, this is 0.03% of UNRWA's workforce. Well, Israel has presented evidence that, if authenticated and corroborated, could indicate that said staff were guilty. UNRWA fired the individuals. UNRWA's Commissioner General, Philippe Lazzarini, has stated emphatically that the engagement of UNRWA employees in such activities, if true, in fact, would be an appalling betrayal of Palestine refugees and of UNRWA. So that's clear where UNRWA stands if any employee was engaged. Over the past 5 years, I've had the privilege of working at UNRWA-USA alongside a group of amazing colleagues, again, including one who is sitting here in this room among us today, Lori. I happen to come from this work from a specific background, so I thought I'd share that with you all today. A little bit personal, but it is what it is. My grandfather escaped Nazi Germany in 1934. He fled to the United States, thankfully, which took him in. His sister and her family were killed in the Holocaust. My grandfather arrived in this country and he said, never again. Never again shall a group of people be brutalized for who they are or where they were born or what faith they happen to hold dear. And I happened to marry a wonderful Moroccan gentleman. I told some of you that he was having trouble adjusting to our new puppy in the house. He has never had a puppy. We have a new puppy, Lori. Has never had a dog. They weren't so common in Morocco when he grew up. Now they are. So he's home with the puppy right now. Otherwise, he might be here. So I married a wonderful Moroccan man. Our kids are, in Arabic, you say nus, or half-half. Half American, half Moroccan, also half Jewish, half Muslim. And I'll tell you right now that their Jewish side is no more human than their Muslim side, and their Muslim side is no more human than their Jewish side. I do the work I do today because of the legacy of my grandfather and his message that not just one religion or group needs to be protected, but all. And I'll just say also that, of course, my parents had a big influence on me. My mother gave me unconditional love. She said, no matter what everyone hurls at you in this world, you are loved. And that's been a blessing, a gift. And my dad taught me to question authority. which has also been helpful. And he also reaped the benefits of such questioning during my adolescence. I might be getting the same for my 13-year-old twins right now. So what comes around goes around. More power to them. So I'll be speaking for the next 12 or 15 minutes and want to share with you what I'll be discussing. I will start my remarks by walking you through a little bit of the context, the condensed history of the last 75, 76 years, which will bring us up to this moment. I promise you, very condensed. I know nobody's here for a history lesson. And then I will describe the current catastrophic state of the situation in Gaza in order to ensure that we have a shared set of facts about just how bad things are on the ground. And then I want to help you understand that even in the middle of an active war zone, how thousands of UNRWA staff are risking and sometimes, as we all know, losing their lives right now to help those under siege in Gaza. Lastly, recognizing that we're having this discussion in the context of the mission of a United Nations mandated agency being slandered, while its staff are literally risking and losing their lives to get critical aid in the hands of Palestinian refugees, I want all of us in this room, at least, and on this call, to understand the cynical and dark politicization of humanitarian aid that is taking place today, and particularly the political pressure that UNRWA's life-saving humanitarian aid is under. That said, my overall message to you today is simple. The situation in Gaza is catastrophic. It is overwhelming. It might be easy for even the most caring and concerned of Americans to feel they need to tune out the news for their own emotional survival, or because they feel there's nothing meaningful they can do. But there is. The point of this talk is to leave you with two meaningful actions to take. One, call or write your elected representative and continue, as I know many of you have, to demand an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Your voice matters. And while you're on the phone with your elected representative, demand the restoration of US government funding to UNRWA. I already talked to some folks who are doing that. Actually, you can do this at any time. You can go to UNRWA-USA.org/advocate, and you will see these two calls to action on our website, calling for an immediate ceasefire and restoring US government funding to UNRWA. I have a feeling this crowd is pretty familiar with these, but go to our website and go to advocate, and you will find these. Now I'll turn to some context with some brief history about the need for and the creation of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees. I'm getting some background. Okay, I think maybe if you're on Zoom to go on mute because we're getting some background.
I think she has.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. Now I'll turn to some context and some brief history about the need for and the creation of UNRWA. UN obligations to Palestinians began with the partition of Palestine under UN Resolution 181 in 1947, which called for the end of the British mandate and the recommendation of the partition of Palestine into, as we know, separate Arab and Jewish states. The Jewish Agency adopted this plan. The Jewish Agency accepted, while the radicalized Irgun and Stern groups on the Jewish side and the Arab states rejected. On May 14, 1948, the British officially ended their mandate, and it was on the day after, May 15th, that the Jewish Agency proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel, resulting in the first Arab-Israeli war and the forced displacement of some 760,000 Palestinian refugees. During the war, UN Resolution 194 then created the United Nations Conciliation Commission for Palestine in December 1948, tasked with forging a political solution that would immediately realize the right of return for those Palestinian refugees. Unable to mediate the conflict effectively, the UNCCP was quickly overshadowed and replaced by UNRWA. As the focus turned to dealing with the refugees in their host countries up into and until a just political solution was achieved to their plight. Then UNRWA was established by the UN General Assembly in Resolution 302 on December 8, 1949, with a humanitarian and development mandate to provide assistance and protection to Palestine refugees pending a just and lasting solution to their plight, as I said. In practice, over the last 76 years, this has meant serving the essential food, health, shelter, protection, and education needs of Palestine refugees, a population that grew from some 760,000 to some 5.6 million registered Palestine refugees located within UNRWA's 5 sites of operation, which are Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and of course, Gaza. Now I'm going to turn to the humanitarian situation in Gaza. All of us in this room, in this beautiful church today, have seen the news, particularly those in this room, are aware of what's going on. We know the unbearable horror that millions of civilians in Gaza are facing as I speak. I don't need to tell you that Gaza is decimated. 2/3 of all buildings are destroyed. 84% of UNRWA's hundreds of schools have been destroyed or heavily damaged. And this likely includes the boys' school where this church generously contributed the funds to support a desalination plant for school children. All 12 universities in Gaza have been blown up. Hospitals, places of worship, and cemeteries have been targeted and destroyed systematically. All of these violations of international humanitarian law. And of course, we've reached the gruesome benchmark of over 40,000 deaths. We're looking at about 41,500 deaths. And that, of course, doesn't count the thousands who are buried under the rubble. I don't need to tell you that more than 2 million people are trapped in a living hell. Families have been displaced, sometimes up to 9 or 10 times in as many months. Imagine moving every month, being forced to move every month with just what you have on your back, your possessions being smaller and smaller every time you have to move. And 84% of the Gaza Strip, the population of 84% of the Strip has been forcibly removed. So almost the whole Strip has been forced to move. I don't need to tell you that children and women are bearing the brunt of this brutal war on Gaza. There were some 50,000 pregnant women in Gaza when this conflict began. Imagine them going for months without showers, waiting in lines of 500 to use the restroom, giving birth in absolutely unsanitary conditions. I don't need to tell you that acute food insecurity is claiming the lives of multitudes of children, and that over 15,000, that's the estimate, of course, the likelihood is probably much larger, over 15,000 children have been killed. Gaza also holds the largest cohort of child amputees in history. I don't need to tell you that families are starving and children are dying from malnutrition, and polio, of course, has reemerged after 25 years because the sanitary conditions are so bad. Other disease is likely spreading. It's basically a petri dish with garbage and refuse not being picked up because there's no infrastructure. So this is why we want you to contact your local representative, call for an immediate ceasefire, call for the restoration of these needed funds for UNRWA to do its work. Because until there's a ceasefire, children and families will continue to be blown up, their family members and neighbors forced to collect their body parts in plastic bags. Until there's a ceasefire, millions of people will continually be forced to relocate with what is left of their meager possessions on their back. And until there's a ceasefire, aid workers will be under threat, and it will be extremely difficult to render the aid necessary to care for the millions facing acute hunger, critical injury, deadly disease, and abject trauma. Until there's a ceasefire, there is simply no safe place in Gaza. However, without a ceasefire, there is aid being rendered, and that aid must be supported. While Americans see the horror of what is happening, at least those tuning in, like those in this room, what many do not see in the headlines is the help being given by UNRWA and other UN agencies and many smaller aid groups. You can only imagine, given the catastrophic conditions, how hard it has been to deliver aid in a war zone. But I want to tell you a little bit about what UNRWA has done. UNRWA is putting food in the hands of desperate families. It has provided emergency food aid to 1.1 million people, that's over half of the population, flour to 1.9 million people, almost the entire population. UNRWA, of course, is treating the wounded. UNRWA treats over 20,000 patients a day at 9 clinics. They used to have 26 clinics. So 26 minus 9 is what, 5? I can't do the math quick enough. 11? Yeah, thank you. Anyway, you know. Used to be 26 clinics, and they have 100 mobile units also treating patients. And because so many hospitals have been destroyed or heavily damaged so they no longer function, UNRWA actually has become the largest provider of medical care in the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip used to actually have, up until a couple of months ago, some very good hospitals. Unfortunately, now UNRWA, which was only really, its health centers were only made for really primary and secondary care, are forced to dealing with operations and other things. And also medical supplies, as we all know, are scarcer and scarcer. UNRWA is providing trauma relief, so not just treating the physically wounded, but those mental wounds, supporting over 450,000 children and 250,000 adults through the work of 500 counselors, providing daily group and individual sessions. 1,000 UNRWA staff have delivered polio vaccines to hundreds of thousands of children. UNRWA and the other UN agencies have reached about 565,000 children. That's just 90% of the children in Gaza, which is absolutely necessary to stem the spread of polio. They've been able to do this in just a couple of days with 3 missions, one to the south of Gaza, one to the middle, and one to the north. And this was because there was this intermittent moment of a cessation of bombardments that allowed them to move around the strip. But that said, a group of UNRWA staff were in a car after being given approval by the Israelis to go into the north, and were surrounded by guns and told to stop. A bulldozer trying to destroy the car. And 2 staff members were taken and held for 6 or 7 hours and underwent interrogation. These were people who'd already been approved to provide the polio vaccine. UNRWA is working tirelessly to prevent a lost generation of children who are forced to miss out on their educations. A return to learning started in August 1st, focusing on 28,000 children in or near UNRWA shelters. And they have plans to scale up to the 600,000 students in temporary learning settings as conditions allow. And these classrooms are supposed to be in the shelters. The shelters were the schools. They became shelters. And of course, they're overcrowded with families, and they're also facing bombardment. There's been over 250 incidents where UNRWA shelters, you know, they have the blue UN flag on their roof. They have the blue UN flag flying on the ground, and they are continually targeted and attacked, as we know, by the Israeli military. So UNRWA is trying to bring children back as long as it's safe. It is obviously extremely difficult conditions to hold these schools, but they're doing their best. Even with all the good that UNRWA is doing, and maybe even because of it, UNRWA is facing virulent and extremely dangerous attacks, both physically, as I've described, and politically. Over 220 UNRWA staff members have been killed in this war on Gaza. There's one now, as we know, staff member killed for the first time in 10 years in the West Bank. And this is the highest staff death toll in UN history. Gaza-based staff have been detained by Israeli security forces and subsequently reported mistreatment and even torture. There are legislative proposals by Israeli lawmakers to evict the agency from its premises in East Jerusalem and to label it a terrorist organization. In the United States, as we know, some legislators are attempting to prevent US government funding to UNRWA permanently. So what is the reason for these attacks? In reality, UNRWA represents an uncomfortable truth that its detractors don't want to accept. UNRWA is targeted because of its role in keeping Palestinians alive, because of its role in safeguarding the rights of Palestine refugees, and because it embodies the international community's commitment to a just and lasting political solution. In essence, UNRWA is being attacked precisely because it keeps alive 2 essential truths: the very existence of Palestinian refugees and a right of return, and alongside it, the promise of a future Palestinian state. As executive director of UNRWA-USA, I know how diligently UNRWA takes this responsibility and the responsibility of its neutrality and its humanitarian mission. The independent Kelowna report, commissioned early this year by UNRWA, and it was led by former French Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna, This report found that UNRWA's neutrality practices are among the most robust of any United Nations agency. And last month, and this wasn't widely reported, 118 UN member countries, including the United States, came together to express their shared commitment to UNRWA, declaring UNRWA the backbone of all humanitarian response in Gaza, and expressing appreciation for UNRWA's dedication to humanitarian principles, including the principle of neutrality. In closing, we live in a time where humanitarian aid itself is under attack. This is where UNRWA and UNRWA-USA need your support. You can tell your friends and loved ones about the real work of our missions and the support we need in the face of these dark and cynical attacks on the work of humanitarian actors. You all in this room are already doing this work, I know, and you can help us continue to transform this dark and ugly politicization of crucial work. And you can help us, again, by writing your elected representatives, calling for a ceasefire, calling right now for the restoration of U.S. funding, saying that you support the UNRWA Funding Restoration Act in Congress. And you can go to UNRWA-USA.org to do this. And as my colleague and Lori's former colleague, Layla, says, if you don't get the representatives, speak to the young staffers. They're the future leaders. We cannot let the representatives' apathy get in the way of our advocacy. And advocacy, as Layla will say, is about being annoyingly persistent. So keep it up. Finally, some brief personal reflections as I close my talk today. The war on Gaza is overwhelming. And now I have to add, unfortunately, the war on the West Bank and the war on Lebanon. The videos that come across our phones and our computer screens and our TV screens are, let's face it, unbearable to watch. And I think there's so many stories you guys have seen, but the one that hit me hardest in recent weeks was the one of a father, Mohammed Abu al-Qumsan, fainting in grief at the hospital where he went to pick up the birth certificates of his 4-day-old twins, only to learn that they've been killed along with their mother by an Israeli airstrike while he was in transit. And I'm the mom of twins. Doesn't matter who I'm a person. Seeing him break down was a day that I lost it, one of many days. Of course, the trauma we are feeling is nothing like the trauma that those are feeling on the ground. However, I tell myself and all of my beloved American friends from every ethnic and religious background, there are times where we have to stop and let ourselves see these videos. We can't do it every day because we can't function, right? We need to function. We need to take care of our children, our dependents, our loved ones. But we have to stop occasionally and see these videos and feel them. We have to let ourselves be human and be affected. And when we're human, we feel pain. And when we feel pain, we act. We take action. Thank God for those brave souls who took action and protected Jews during the Holocaust. Thank God for those who took in my grandfather's niece to try to protect her before she was sent to die in the gas chambers. Thank God the U.S. took in my grandfather. And thank you today for those who choose to speak out for Palestinian humanity. History will not forget you. Thank you. It's a miracle I got through without crying. But I'm happy to take any questions. Take questions and have a discussion. Yes, please.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I've had three quick questions. Number one, we heard that the refugees who leave Gaza and get into Egypt are struggling horribly. And I wondered if you could maybe comment on what UNRWA is doing in there. Number two was, of the 200 or so UNRWA workers that have been killed, do you have any idea proportionally of how many of those were actually exactly targeted? Is it a big percentage? And number three, comment about now what UNRWA is planning in Lebanon. There's a lot of questions.
No, it's okay. That's okay. They're actually, I can answer those. So the first, although I forgot the first one already, Egypt. So UNRWA does not have a mandate. UNRWA, for all the attacks, UNRWA is mandated. Its humanitarian mission is mandated by the world community, right? It's the countries of the world who have said through the UN, UNRWA needs to do this work. The mandate as it exists and as it has existed for 76 years is only in those 5 field sites of operation: Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, the West Bank and East Jerusalem and Gaza. So it doesn't have the mandate or the ability to work in Egypt. And what I understand, and I'm not sure actually, I don't want to speak out of turn. I'm not sure if this is the Egyptians or the Israelis, but they're also limiting UNHCR, who deals with every other refugee in the world, from working in Egypt. So this is a population that is in very difficult straits, as you said. It's probably too early for me to say this because who knows what'll happen, but why not? We actually want to talk to UNRWA. Don't tell them this because I got to present it right. But we want to talk to them about whether there's a way we can somehow support students whose educations have been disrupted. There are so many brilliant students from Gaza. And we have an incredibly generous, there was a bequest, a doctor in California, Italian American, who had happened to go to visit Gaza and the West Bank, and he oh yes, thank you, and he was so profoundly moved by what he saw. He left in his will $1.8 million to UNRWA-USA, all for scholarships for students, and they're students from Gaza or the West Bank who are studying medicine or engineering. And we haven't been able to give those funds away because all the universities are destroyed in Gaza. So we're going to see with UNRWA if there's any way for us to uniquely serve this population in Egypt. But right now, our MOU is really that we can only fund UNRWA. So there has to be a negotiation, and I'm trying to see, because desperate times call for unique and desperate and innovative measures, and we would love to be able to support that community. In terms of the employees, that most of them were killed while working. So and most of them are teachers. So they were killed most of them were killed in the shelters, in the schools turned shelters. And then there were, at times where a UN car was driving and they were bombed. Some of them were killed like other civilians in Gaza in their houses. But many of them were killed when the shelters were hit. Yep. And then Lebanon, UNRWA has worked in Lebanon for a very long time. There's only about 200,000 Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. The vast majority of the population UNRWA serves is 60% of those 2.2 million, 2.1 million in Gaza. But now it serves the whole, of course, the whole of the strip. I believe about 600,000 or 700,000 in the West Bank. But those 200,000 in Lebanon, I got to go to Gaza and Lebanon in 2022. Believe it or not, as hard as Gaza, as difficult as life in Gaza was with the 17-year blockade. I mean, it's even deeper tragedy now to think of this, but when I went there in 2022, families smile, they're out on the corniche, they're finding a way to love and life and find happiness and joy, and the students were, it's so horrible to think about the lost futures of these people who were brimming with pride and brilliance. And I'll tell you more about what I experienced there in Gaza. It was truly profound. And then I went from Gaza to Lebanon and went to Burj al-Baranja camp in Lebanon, and I saw more desperation in Lebanon than I saw in Gaza, because the Lebanese lira had bottomed out. The economy had bottomed out, and so whatever cash Palestine refugees had would only go so far. And so it was estimated in 2022, I'm sure it's worse now, that a parent would have to work 2 weeks straight to be able to afford a pound of meat. And they were feeding their kids before they fed themselves. And so there were people who had cancer and who could not afford treatment, but they said, it doesn't matter because I'm going to die of starvation before I die from cancer. So I'm going to spend it on whatever food I can find. So UNRWA's role has been cash assistance. But as the lira inflated, the cash assistance became less and less
valuable. So we are continuing to provide funds for cash assistance. I don't, in terms of, you know, humanitarian aid right now, their mandate is in the camps where they are, so they will continue to provide that aid. But it's very, yeah, and of course, there's so much funds, rightly so, going to Gaza, but the other fields need funding. And the very, the thing that we try to stress that maybe isn't in the news as much is withholding funding to UNRWA is not only withholding funding to Gaza and Gaza rehabilitation and restoration and humanitarian aid, but it's withholding funding to Lebanon, to Jordan, to Syria, to the West Bank, to East Jerusalem, and these are populations that rely for their very survival on UNRWA in many cases. Yes.
Tell us about UNRWA-USA. How many staff you have, and what is your specific parts of your mission?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. That makes me think I probably left out that basic fact from my speech. So, we, up until a couple months ago, we were 8 people. And I say that because we punch above our weight, and we've done so much because the 8 people, and one of those was Lori for many years, were incredible. And these are people who do the work because they're compelled to do it. It's a labor of love, and it's a joy. It's a joy to do this work. As hard as life is, it's a joy. And we legitimately, luckily like each other. So being together and doing good and helping people, helping Palestinians in these dire circumstances, it keeps us moving, it keeps us alive, it keeps us motivated. So in early October 2023, we had about 7,000 donors. From October to December 2023, that 7,000 became 76,000 donors. And today we probably have, year to date, we have probably 90,000, probably since October, something 120,000. I got to get the numbers worked out. So we grew 9-10-fold, immense. And last year, after having revenue of 5, 6, 7 million, last year our revenue was 32 million. You know, the vast majority went right out the door to UNRWA. This year to date, we're at about 35 million. So by the end of the year, we could be 45, 50 million. So because of how quickly we've grown and because we're under such attack, we've been able to staff up to address the increased revenue, how we need to function. And so now we have 14 staff members, which is still not enough given the work we're doing, but we're starting to be, you know, a little bit more calm. We've been working around the clock since October 7th, as you can imagine.
And specifically, what is your
mission? Yes. Our mission is to really raise awareness about the plight of Palestine refugees, and really importantly, the work that UNRWA does to serve the food, health, shelter, education, and protection needs of this population, and to raise funds for these programs. And so it's both raising funds and advocacy and awareness building in the US, which is why we were on Capitol Hill on Thursday, helping these Congress men and women try to get this UNRWA Funding Restoration Act approved.
There's sort of an observation. It seems absolutely, especially in America, completely unethical that in '48, an organization was created to undo the wreckage that England basically walked away from, and, you know, probably in a sense of good faith. Put this organization in charge of an unsolvable problem. And now, I think, due to a lot of propaganda, just pretends they can pull a plug, and that's okay. I mean, that's just somehow that basic message needs to be brought out there, at least unless I'm missing something, that's what's so unethical.
Absolutely. And then also do all this work, you know, until we stop funding you, but do all this work without UN actually funding the organization. So the UN only funds the kind of management at the top level, but UNRWA relies on donations from countries around the world to do its work. And so it's been for many years, especially when Trump defunded, it's been year to year trying to piece together. So they're supposed to somehow do all this work, figure out 30,000 staff members, exactly what's in their mind. Are they pro-Hamas? I mean, they can't do this. They can't mind read all these staff members. And then, ever since the defunding of the US this time around, they're month to month. Because they're living month to month. They can't guarantee that people are going to be working in 3 months because they don't have enough money to get to that stage. So there's so much that is structurally wrong with the situation. And also somehow people think they're charged with a political solution. UNRWA is simply charged with humanitarian aid up until there's a political solution. And that political solution has to be by the parties involved. UNRWA has nothing to do with that political solution. So people also, UNRWA, you've got to solve this. It's not theirs to solve. So UNRWA's put in a horrific situation. And then to have these unfounded assertions and accusations, which started with calling them anti-Semitic and have just only grown from there. You know, what we would say at UNRWA-USA is they haven't done a good enough job of defending themselves, but also we say, how can you? Your straps, your funds are not enough to do your basic work. How do you have an infrastructure to deal with?
It was almost set up to fail.
Yeah.
It's amazing it took this long.
Yeah.
And it's almost that in doing the bombing and saying, oh, there's no safe zones because of any number of reasons. There's the tunnels, there's the people hiding. Any excuse will do.
Yeah.
And it's accepted.
Yeah.
And unless you fight back, which is happening a little bit with donations creeping up,
Yeah.
but I understand, in a way, your very survival is still on the table.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Even if you get money, it's still subject to the next administration.
100%. And it's been that way for a long time. Yeah, I agree. We can think about ways, I'll tell you more about ways UNRWA-USA is dealing with this. And we're legally distinct entities. So that's why I can differentiate us, and I'll tell you more. Yes.
I just want to say, I think you replied to the gentleman's question. I don't think it's UNRWA's mandate to get even slightly political.
Yeah.
Given the attack already, I mean, it'll be the same.
Yeah.
So UNRWA was set up just to provide what we thought, the US thought, the world thought, at that time, short period.
They thought it was
taken
short.
care of, and there will be a political solution. The guilt is ours that we here in this room, or the world, did not find a political solution. That's not UNRWA's fault. That was just a little comment. I have a question. Who's the person who was there on Thursday in the Senate hearing? That was, faced the wrath of the,
In the congressional hearing,
Yeah.
I know Rashida Tlaib was there. I don't know which.
was it somebody?
The racist attack by John Kennedy.
Was it somebody called Maya Berry?
Maya Berry. She's a friend.
Friend, part of UNRWA, right?
No, she was the head of Arab American Institute
Okay.
and founder with James Zogby. I've had dinner at her house. She's obviously a wonderful person, anyone who knows her. And she handled that so well. I mean, this is the kind of where we've gotten in this country, is the absolute bigotry.
I was going to ask you to comment on that. She already answered. How to start crying.
She handled it so well,
Yes, she did.
and also to say, to be able to respond to that bigotry and have the presence of mind to say, of course I don't support Hamas, and I do support UNRWA, and damn right there's a distinction. Like that was so profound. But this is the world we're in, where that bigotry can just
I think you should put the blame back in this room.
Yeah.
People like us. It's your
Yeah.
fault it's happening.
Yeah.
Say that. Don't go away without saying it.
you could say that. Yes.
In terms of countering the message of all the negativity and the polarization.
Yeah.
Do you have some initiatives going on where
Yeah.
you're trying to tell the broader story and
Yeah.
trying to get that word out? Because
Yeah.
that's so key, I think.
Absolutely. So, a couple years, I started about 5 years ago. It was such a small organization. We started to grow. And, a key thing that folks have been doing on the team, but not in a kind of strategic or concentrated way, was narrative transformation about Palestine refugees. And this had always been in all of our minds. And, but we basically, and Lori was there when we did this, we kind of changed the structure of the organization a little bit, where communications, instead of just supporting, really raising money, getting money that we could send out, it became strategic communications, which is about narrative transformation to get to a wider audience. So if we get to a wider audience, we've changed people. So it's not just preaching to the converted, right? We're going to get to those who might have other ideas by humanizing humans who happen to be Palestinian. And then we get more people supporting our cause. We bring in more funds. We're able to do more outreach. So that's what we started doing. And our amazing director of communications, Layla Mukhaiber, has been the lead on that. And so a couple of we've done a lot of besides our Gaza 5K, our signature event, we've done the virtual Gaza 5K, which brought musicians, Palestinian musicians. We also, all of the artistry on, if you've seen any of our artistry for Gaza 5K or for any of our events, they're by amazing, brilliant Palestinians in the diaspora. We did Gaza to the World. I don't know if anybody had a chance to see this, go look it up. It was in August of 2023, which our colleague Nahid Rais, whose family is from Gaza, he did a concert with Soul Band and some others on the shores of Gaza, beautiful, showing the beauty of Gaza. And we look back at that now as an artifact. It's very emotional. So, and then we're getting ready for a 4-city tour with Mu'taz Azeza, the citizen journalist who gained 18 million followers for showing the world I'm not allowed to say this UNRWA out loud, but the genocide in Gaza. I'll tell you more about that later. He showed the world what was going on and gained so many followers, more than President Biden, because of how, with such the humanity with which he showed that world and the truth. We're bringing him on a 4-city tour. So he's going to speak about his experience starting in Houston, Anaheim, New York, and then DC. And those are sold out shows. So we do many programs like this. Yeah. And for all that, we're called terrorists and Hamas and Jew haters and yeah.
Is there any humanitarian assistance entering Gaza now? And if so, who's providing it and how's it getting in there?
Yeah.
They talked about this pier and causeway that the Americans had built, which has been taken out now. So it's confusing, to say the least.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's the Israelis want that confusion because they want you to feel hopeless, right? They want you to feel there's nothing you could do, so you just give up. So I'm glad to answer that. Very glad to answer that. So up until recently, up until the last couple of months, I can't give you exactly, but let's say April or May. And maybe from November or December to April or May, much more aid was getting in. So, and that aid was coming through Rafah. It was coming through Kerem Abu Salim or Kerem Shalom, which are in the south. And then a little aid was coming through Eretz after a couple of months. And then what happened is the Israelis took over Rafah, and that's when the aid drops severely. And Rafah and Kerem Abu Salim were where most of the aid was coming through. There were not close to the 500 trucks needed daily to provide the needs of the Gaza Strip, but we were getting something like 150, 200 trucks a day for a while at the most. Now there's about 63 trucks, if we're lucky, 30 on some days. And so the Israelis used to say, it's not our fault, it's the UN's fault, it's UNRWA's fault. We're letting aid in. But in those early months, what was happening is that the aid was, I remember seeing all those trucks waiting at the border. So they'd be in inspections and they'd go through, and then the Israelis would take out of those trucks like a water, what's it called? Not desalination, but a purification tablet. Those are not allowed. Tent poles, not allowed. They take one thing out, and instead of letting everything else go through, you had to go to the back of the line, miles long, wait hours and hours overnight, 36 hours to get back. So that was slowing up the inspections process. And then you would get the truck into the Gaza Strip, and then UNRWA would get approval. All those things have to be loaded onto UNRWA trucks, and UNRWA would get approval to take this from the south to the middle area, Khan Yunis, or to the north. And then they would start moving the stuff. And then the Israelis would say, nope, you can't go anymore. And we deconflicted, we got approval. Nope, You can't bring it. That's what was happening. Then the Israelis said, outlawed the blue police, or, you know, the essentially the civilian infrastructure, and security was by Hamas, in Gaza. And they said, if we see any blue police, out there, we're going to shoot them. And so when the blue police were not allowed to, like they had been for many years, making sure there's order, and then all society, all security broke down. And so in that environment, it's chaotic. There are gangs, families that are essentially, I don't know what to call them, like they're holding up aid, they're stealing things, there's a black market. But what else do you expect when all of society's norms, controls, security is totally broken down? So it's a mix of all those factors right now that is limiting aid getting from the border to where it needs to go. And then, of course, Israel blew up roads, and they're still not letting aid convoys go in and out. They say, like, I think there's something, half of all aid convoys or more that were deconflicted and approved don't actually go through. The Israelis stop them. That said, aid is getting in. It's nowhere near enough, but aid is getting in. And there was recently a report by 15 of our fellow humanitarian organizations working there that said that I think around December, 43% of aid was stopped, and now 83% of aid is stopped. So it's much worse. But that said, that 17% is getting in, and when anything's getting in, it's a godsend. It's a lifesaver. UNRWA staff, all the funds that go to UNRWA are supporting the some 2,000 to 3,000 staff who are in the medical clinics treating the wounded, who are providing trauma care, who are doing education, and who are doing the teaching and learning when it happens in the shelters. Yes, Mike.
Mara, how did UNRWA react to the British journal Lancet report about the real number of lost lives, 186,000? How did you react to that? Because you're constantly hearing it went 30,000, 35,000, 40,000, and it's got constant number right now, 40,000. So how does UNRWA react to that?
Yeah, so there's been, so I don't know about UNRWA per se. I can tell you about our staff at UNRWA-USA. So there's a woman, amazing woman, journalist, Mona Shalabi, who's Iraqi American, and she did some of the amazing infographics we see in the New York Times about the war in Gaza. So she actually looked into the Lancet report, and what she said, and I'm following her understanding, but the Lancet report, when it said 186, it was saying projected of the people who die from disease, from famine, from malnutrition, from contaminated water, all these things. So they were saying if conditions continue at this state, this is what the death toll is going to look like. They weren't saying right now the death toll is 186,000. So that's what she pointed out. And only then did I start to understand the Lancet article a little differently. So there are people who, so basically nothing takes away the severity. And we all know that the 41,500 number is an undercount by far. But the 186 was a projection, 186K was a projection on, should these conditions continue, this is what's going to happen. So we take, as UNRWA takes, and we, because of our relationship with UNRWA, take the Ministry of Health, the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza's numbers, which are the 41,500. And we all, I don't know if you all saw, but they produced a list of 36,000 of those numbers, of those people who were killed, their names, their ID numbers, their age. The first 14 pages were children under 1 year of age. So I think my biggest thing that I talk about with this is that you get all these articles saying the Hamas controlled Ministry of Health says alleged number. So these are deaths that they have 36,000 names for. The others are parts of, what do they do? What we need to do is write the editors and say there's backup for these. This is the Palestinian Ministry of Health, actually, because they're coordinated with the Ministry of Health in the West Bank. This is not an easily dismissed organization, and that they produced all those names is a key part of that, correcting the record here, because that is one of the hardest things. You're dealing with all this trauma and tragedy, and then people don't even believe it, the deaths, and you're just,
That's critical. You've got to be marginalized and made
Yeah.
just, unbelievable. That's
yeah, and everything you say is not true then, yeah.
right.
Yes, are you, okay, yes, please.
When the US funding shrunk.
Yeah.
Did other countries step up?
Good question, very good question. So 16 countries who were funding paused the funding with the allegations that came out. And of course, they paused prematurely because the US did. And there's an article which shares a lot of what happened in the New York Times from last weekend by Ben Hubbard, showing that part of the article is good, part of it's not good. Anyway, so I don't fully endorse the article, but it does show what happened behind the scenes, and it's useful to read. 15 of those 16 countries are back in. Some of those countries are coming in more than they had before, and there are other countries who had never paused who've doubled or tripled. But the US was providing $420 million. That's a quarter to a third of the whole budget. So that deficit is huge, and they haven't made up for that. I'm really proud to say, I shouldn't be proud, it's the American people who contributed through funding UNRWA-USA $50 million to the Gaza emergency. So UNRWA-USA is the 4th largest funder in the whole world to the Gaza emergency. Over, I think after a couple of countries, the UK, France, and the US, because the US had still put in 70 million. $50 million from the American people. So I always say the American people have stepped up where our government has stepped aside. It's still not getting to that 420, so we're not a replacement by any means, but we're doing the job that our government's not doing. You're doing the job that our government's.
Well, we have gone past our time.
Okay.
So we want to thank you for coming. It was
Thank
such
you.
a pleasure having you.
Thank you all for your good questions.
We have some of the action alerts over here, if you'd like to take them with you, and please let the government, your representatives know, and press them for the Restoration Act. There's also a sign-up sheet if anybody wants to sign up to receive information from UNRWA or from our